host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. Joining Ben Kinsley and I today is Beth Pearce, who is the treasurer for the state of Vermont. Beth, welcome to our program.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So, Beth, you've served, this is your 4th term in office,
That's correct.
In November 2016. But before that, you were
the deputy treasurer.
Deputy treasurer.
Yes.
Always for Jeb Spalding?
Well, actually, I was a deputy treasurer in another state before I had the good sense to come to Vermont.
Exactly, and we're glad you're here.
I love it. I love it. And I was Jeb's deputy for 7.5 years.
That's great.
And prior to being a deputy in Massachusetts, I was a financial operations manager, a deputy comptroller. So I've been doing government finance for about 40 years. I'm feeling a little old when I say the 40 years part, but yes, 40 years.
That's great. Well, I was just telling Beth before the camera started rolling that we are very fortunate to have her here. I was looking through what you've accomplished, and I only went back a couple of years. It's really amazing, and I'm glad you're here. So
well, we've got a great staff.
Good job.
Good people.
That's
that
true.
Really,
you do.
and that's the most important part. I remember in May of 11, before Irene, the May floods, and the governor said, that people don't need to come in, unless you're, essential employees. And my folks were there.
Wow.
And they were there because they wanted to make sure the child support checks got out.
Oh,
and when they finished
I remember
with that,
reading about that.
They went out and they took a look and said, well, let's see what else is out there. And they saw that you had some family daycare checks on. They got them all out.
That's great.
And you didn't have to ask. They just came in and did it. And that's the kind of commitment that's special in Vermont. And it's not just my office. You see that in the governor's office. You see it all over the state. People that really do care about Vermont.
Right.
And it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to work in a state that has that kind of mindset.
That's great.
Well, really, state government wouldn't function without your department. You basically do a little bit of everything in terms of making sure all the finances are flowing.
Tell them that when I'm doing my budget next year.
Okay, I'll do that.
Well, I didn't read much about you during the budget process. So
remind the legislatures. Yeah.
But we're involved in a variety of different projects. We obviously maintain the retirement systems.
Thank you.
And that's right. And last year, I don't have the numbers for this June yet, but last year we did 530 retirements in the month of June.
Wow.
With a staff of 13 people and 4 counselors. This year, I think the numbers are going to be pretty comparable. We manage the funds. We don't invest them. We hire managers to do that, and I'm on a board, the Vermont Pension Investment Committee. I'm vice chair of that, so I'm not the sole trustee there. I am the sole trustee for the state's cash, operating cash, and some of the other trust funds, and we take that very seriously. With the state's banker, we have about $5 billion coming in and going out in any given year.
Wow.
So there's a lot of different pieces to the office, not to mention that signature on those checks that you receive, or we hope direct deposit, because that's better for the taxpayer.
I so hope that goes through. I know we've tried it a couple of times. But they just like that hard check, don't they?
A lot of people do. Retirees, we do require people to be on direct deposit, paychecks now. So, and a good number of our payments are through direct deposit. And we've created some new electronic processing initiatives that make it easier for companies to reconcile, something called vendor portal. So from our end, we think that we're encouraging people to do the right thing there.
That's right.
And
well, you
it's
have
better
a
for the
great
taxpayer.
staff, because I am totally paranoid about making sure I make the deadline for the health payments that retirees get, the supplemental, I guess they call it.
Yep.
And it's 2 times a year, June and January. And I am like berserk that I make this. And I can't tell you how many times I've called your staff and what's the date, when am I on time, because I think, what happens if you miss that payment?
Well, music to my ears. They're good people. I
nice.
do a lot of financial literacy programs in the high schools, and I run into teachers who will say, I'm about to retire. I talked to Kathy, or I talked to Tina, and they did such a wonderful job, and it's good to hear.
Yeah, we wanted to talk a lot about what I went through all of your website. Good website, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Website, all of the articles on you in Digger. There's a whole bunch. Do you know what's interesting about all the articles? You have got more responses for people responding to the article. No, good, mostly good. Some of these get carried away these days, but it's pages. I've made a mistake of actually copying the article, and 20 pages of comments come out, because it's everything you do is very near and dear to people's hearts.
Well, we affect the finances of the state, your tax dollars, and we're trying to find ways to keep costs down. and add value at the same time. You know, one of the programs that we did this year was the Green Mountain Secure Retirement Plan.
Right.
And that, to me, is good for the individual. And it's also good for the state. And it was in the economic bill that both on the Republican side, Senator Mullen supported, and on the Democratic side, the chair.
So expand that on us a little bit, because I know I was going to talk about it a little bit later, but we can. What is it exactly?
Well, we did a little bit of a
with that.
study, and you know, from my end, people, when they have an adequate and reliable income in retirement, they buy goods and services. They're part of an economic generator for the state. And what we saw was 104,000 Vermonters do not have access to employer-sponsored retirement programs.
That many?
104,000. And so we wanted to do something about that. And we also wanted to do it in a way that was good for business. And we took a look at different options that states have looked at, and 20-some-odd states have looked at these issues. We're the first to come up with what's called a multiple employer plan. And it's a voluntary plan. And I want to stress that, because I think if you make that plan the best it possibly can be, small businesses are going to join. What we found when we talked to businesses is that they're working 24/7. If they could work 25/8, they would, in their businesses. So they didn't have time to vet retirement plans. They didn't have time to look at the investment options. So if we were able to provide a stable group of mutual funds that employees could invest in, that had low cost, best in class, and by pooling investments, be able to lower the costs that businesses are in. And so we were able to get legislation sponsored the last 2 years to create this program, and we're off and running. We're in the planning phases. Our mandate is to have this up by January of 19.
That is so
I'm
great.
planning on being ahead of schedule. You know, on time and on budget is always a good thing.
Does this mean for nonprofits too?
Nonprofits, self-employed individuals.
Oh, Beth, that's great.
And when people have reliable income, as I said, they buy those goods and services. They're part of that, and it gives people an opportunity for a lifetime of financial well-being. You want it for your family. You want it for your neighbors. We want it for every single Vermonter. It's the opportunity. You do with that opportunity what you will do. You know, people have choices, but we want to give them the tools to be able to succeed.
So if they join, the state is running this, is there any employee relationship, or it's like if they belong to a nonprofit, join your pension plan, I hope I'm saying this correctly, is there a link with them? Or?
Certainly. Well, the link would be through the employer. So the employer would offer that to his or her employees.
Yeah.
And if they do offer it, we would have automatic enrollment where you can opt out, because we've seen auto enrollment actually helps with inertia. People say, I'm going to fill out the forms, and then they say, I'm going to fill out the forms. Then they say, well, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe next year. So this helps with that inertia, gets people interested in it. So businesses would have to opt in, or self-employed individuals, or nonprofits. And what it would allow us to do is offer some very good retirement options that employees can do. Down the road, we're hoping to allow employees, if they want to. Everything about this is voluntary, to do matching contributions if they want, but we're not going to start there. We're going to start with employee contributions.
Because I'm pretty active in a nonprofit here in Montpelier, and the one thing that employees ask and the nonprofit can't afford is a pension plan. So this
and administering
is so
it,
perfect.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're thrilled with this. I believe there was one vote in opposition to it on the floor. Now, not everybody was there that day, and maybe one in one of the committees. It really had bipartisan support, and I really thank Governor Scott for supporting the plan and working with us on it.
I can't imagine anybody objecting to it.
It's a good deal.
It's a good deal for small businesses. Particularly, they don't have to go
Yeah.
out and create these pension plans themselves. They can just opt into this.
Absolutely,
larger one,
absolutely.
Social Security ain't what it's cracked up to
No.
be. You can't get too far on that.
If you try to rely on that, and what happens when people don't have adequate income, they rely on different forms of state and federal assistance.
Yeah.
And we want to be able to provide an opportunity for
Right.
economic prosperity, to lower the cost of those social services as well in the
just
process.
great.
So
That's
it's a
great.
win-win as far as we can see. Good for the individual, good for the prosperity of the state.
And that'd be out of your office, and you hire a manager like you do the pension plans?
Well, we would, the couple of models that we have a similar plan for teachers, supplemental retirement program. It's a
Right.
deferred comp plan. It's called a 403B, which is the IRS code to make it a little complicated.
Yeah, right.
But we went, schools were told that in 2009 by the IRS they had to go through a series of rules to offer these programs. And a lot of our schools said, we're not prepared to do that. So what we said is, we'll offer these mutual funds. You will be able to pool and buy into this and have some faith that we're doing the due diligence on these investments. And it's been very successful.
That's great.
But we do it through a third-party vendor. So what we would do is hire someone to
Right,
do that.
right.
And the other part I like about this program is no cost to the state.
Oh,
Our expectation
up.
is that that the
great.
employee contributions will be able to pay for the administration of this program,
Right.
and not have any. There may be some de minimis actions on our staff as I'm working on this program, but we're not seeking an appropriation.
So you've
to
got the
create this.
authority already to do this,
We
and
do.
it's going to be ready January?
January of 19 is the
Oh,
date in
2019.
statute, but we're going to try to move this as
That's
fast as
great.
we can.
Well, the
but we
need
also
is
want
out
to do it
there.
right.
Yeah.
So
Great, good for
Awesome.
you.
I agree with you. The need is
Oh,
out there.
seriously, I thought I was all set. You're never all set.
No, you aren't. Okay.
Seriously. Either that or
Retirement's
my
a tricky
spending
thing.
habits
Well,
have to
you
change.
know-
One of the two.
Well, that's what some folks face, or they have to work longer. They
Right.
find that they have to get a part-time job, and
Right.
if you're not, perhaps if you're disabled, you can't do that, and you're behind the eight
Right.
ball. And women, frankly, are behind the eight ball even more
Anyway,
than men because they earn less during their occupation,
Right.
their working years. So that usually puts them a little further behind in terms of retirement income.
Right.
So
And we outlive you guys anyway.
we outlive. Yeah.
Not a good combination.
Less income and we outlive you. Sorry to bring that up.
Yeah.
But we wish you well.
Yeah, exactly. Take care.
It's genetics, right?
Yeah.
I did want to go back to something you mentioned earlier a few minutes ago, is the financial literacy piece. There's a number of programs in Vermont, some of which you've been involved with. Can you walk us through what's out there for financial literacy programs for
Absolutely.
Vermonters and where you're hoping that those programs go?
Absolutely. So we started, the Treasurer's Office started a focus on financial literacy in 2007. And we brought in a financial literacy director, but it was a department of one. And the idea when we had that was collaboration, not reinventing the wheel, not doing something that somebody else is doing, trying to collect information. So we created a website that allowed people to take a look at what alternatives are out there. Worked with the banks, the Vermont Bankers Association has been a great partner. Worked with nonprofits to try to pull information together. And where there was a gap, try to help fill that and work together. So we've had some really successful programs. One of my favorites is something called Reading is an Investment.
Right.
And it's a program from kindergarten to grade 6, and it's about reading as well. So you're encouraging children to read, working with teachers and librarians. So every year we pick 3 books for the grades, and they have to read those books, complete some logs, working with their teachers or their librarians, and they send it in to us. And if they complete the work, we put their names in a hat and pull out 20 names, and they get a $250 dollar scholarship over at VSAC to start a 529 investment program so that they can start saving for college.
Cool.
It's a great program. In past years, we've had well over 130 schools participate. 4,000 to 5,000 students completed in any given year, which in the few years that we've looked at full participation, not completing but having participated, over 12,000 students. And it's great. It's encouraging them to read. Now, if you're in the kindergarten or first grade class, I'm not going to give you a book on analyzing your 401k or
Right.
asset allocation. It's probably going to be the bunny that saves versus the bunny that doesn't. But it's about developing good habits.
Right.
And it's been a very, very successful program. We've also got a program we call the Treasury Cup, which is it's a competition. Do you remember I remember, I'm old enough, you may not, the College Bowl on TV. It was
sure.
hey, there we go.
Yeah,
and
I know that.
because colleges would compete on different questions. So this would be on consumer protection, economics, financial literacy. And we'll have schools across the state participate. And the winning team goes on to a national competition. And they also get a VSAC scholarship. I believe it's $500 each for the members of the winning team. There are 4 contestants and then 2 alternates, and then the second place team has a $250 scholarship, and it's a great opportunity. The schools get into it. I read a question wrong 2 or 3 years ago, and they haven't let me read a question since because the kids, what if I lose by 5 points and she messed that question up? I said, okay, somebody else is going to do that. The pressure.
Exactly.
The kids really get it. It's come
right.
down to the last question in most of the 2 or 3 of the last 4 years.
That's
so
amazing.
It's a great program.
Yeah.
So who's doing the financial? I heard a year or two ago that Spalding was thinking of putting in a financial program, teaching finances.
Some of the schools are, and we're
they?
encouraging schools to put financial literacy in their economics class,
Right.
their math class. Those are typically where you see them. And
That's
various
great.
schools, Winooski, I believe, has one, a good program. So we're looking at ways we can improve that and work with the Agency of Education. I co-chaired a financial literacy task force with
Nice.
Mr. Pelletier from Champlain
Oh, sure,
College,
right.
and we've come up with some recommendations in the adult, the college, and in the area of K through 12 as well.
You know what I've always wished would be stock market. Is it in the?
It is.
Wait a minute,
Some
Can
of
we
those
sneak
things.
in the back and take it? That's something I never. I mean, I understand the concept of it, but really to play in the
Right.
stock market,
There's
you
some
have to
folks
know
that do
what you're
that.
doing.
Oh, absolutely.
And you can start right out of high school, if not before.
You don't see it in the short-term gains, but being
Sure.
a patient investor is
Right.
important too, and looking at it that way. So we do some programs along that way. We've come
Right.
up with some recommendations. We actually want to work. We're trying to expand our horizon to work with more folks that are at risk, working.
We have something for disabled, right?
Disabled,
Or something?
and able,
yes,
achieving a better life
Yeah,
experience.
Vermont.
able.
It's Vermont Able, Vermontable,
Yes.
Vermont
and it's
Able,
ABL
yeah.
savings.
Yeah,
It's,
and it means achieving a better life experience, and that's a tremendous program. That was states were permitted through a federal law enacted by Congress a few years ago that allowed you to set up ABLE programs. And what it is a way for people with disabilities to save for the future, to use some in a tax-deferred way, so the earnings are tax-deferred, and it allows you also to accumulate money in those accounts towards your future without
is
the
this
benefit
money
cliff.
that they're getting from the state or from the federal government? If that money can be reinvested, or
Well, it's really more. You might have a part-time job.
Okay.
You might have a relative who wants to contribute. You might have different types of sources of income that you
Right.
can put into that.
Okay.
Allows you to get up to $14,000. If you have, let's say, a part-time job and you get up to $2,000 and you're on SSI,
Yep.
you no longer can work, and that's counterproductive.
oh, so this doesn't interfere with that?
Exactly.
Oh, I see. Oh,
so
that's
it allows you
perfect.
to do that. And right now, we've just started the program. In fact, in August, we're going to have our advertising campaign for this. But
Right.
we already have, without our advertising, 70 individuals in the program, and the average deposit right now is about $3,700. So they're over that $2,000
Well,
limit.
this is what we were talking about before the
Exactly.
show about the cliff. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're allowed to save but only so much and you lose money you need now, what would be
Absolutely.
the encouragement to save?
Right.
It was
yeah.
Who would do that?
Exactly. There was a young adult in one of the programs who said, imagine going through your life and never being able to have more than $2,000 of assets.
right.
So this allows you to do it. I also see it as something that's really special for a caregiver. If you're the guardian or parent of an individual with disabilities, that's Jane or John would say, and you're sitting back and saying, what's going to happen
When
to
you
Jane or
pass,
John
right.
when I'm not here?
Right.
This provides some of that financial stability and
That's great.
assurance, and I think it's just, again, a wonderful
Are
program.
other states doing this?
Other
or-
states are. In fact, we teamed up with states because even though we wanted to do this, we're a small state, and we didn't see where we had the economies of scale to do an investment program all by ourselves and have decent fees. So we said, let's combine with other states. So Ohio's the lead state in this program, and we're working with Georgia, Ohio, Kentucky, Missouri, and we've combined our resources to do this. So
Great.
it's cost effective by doing that, lowers the cost, and at the same time provides a great service. We were trying to do a New England brand to this and get the New England states together, but folks who have various states, that's something we can consider down the road. But not all the states were ready. In fact, I think we were the first state to implement in New
great.
England.
There's one benefit after another. That's amazing.
It's a good program, and again, it's about financial security.
Because if anybody needs extra money, when they're retired and older, it's somebody with a disability.
Absolutely.
I mean, good grief.
Absolutely.
And are most of these financial literacy programs focused on high school age kids, or are they focused on college age kids or young adults? Like, where are those efforts focused, or are they kind of spread out among all of those
They're
demographics?
spread out right now. What we've tried to do in our recommendations, and we did file a report with the legislature this year, was look at it in all the buckets, so K through 12, adults, and then college education, and had different recommendations for each group. I'm hoping we can do more with for instance, single parents, ex-offender programs, places where you can end up with a real value for that in terms of the individual gaining something out of it and a value to the state at the same time.
Right.
There's a program in Burlington that works with women ex-offenders. I love this program, and it's called Mercy Connections, actually.
Oh,
and
nice.
these numbers are old, but at one point, the numbers that I had heard, that to incarcerate a woman in the state is $79,000.
Yep.
The
I've heard similar
recidiv-
numbers.
Really?
Yeah.
Good. The recidivism rate is that's not good, by the way. I mean,
But-
good. The numbers agree. The numbers agree, but not good that it costs that much. But and the recidivism rate is over 50%.
Yeah.
This program cost about back a few years ago $1,700 to run per person, and the recidivism rate was between 12 and 15%. It's good for the individual. It's really good for the state in terms of reducing the cost of incarceration.
So how does it, I'm just being dense here, but how does it work that they can put aside, you're teaching them how to save, how to...
It's about mentoring. It's working with
Right.
that individual, so they have a mentoring program. So we want to team up with programs like that, or programs through the various nonprofits to do financial literacy, to
I see.
support their efforts.
Right.
Not to replace, because we don't need more state bureaucracy.
Right.
What we need is to find a way to complement and work together and to collaborate.
Because I'm struggling here, trying to remember the program. I did it in Barry through the court diversion.
Yes.
That we all were pretending to be just released prisoners.
It may be
and-
similar to this program.
and-
Vermont Works for Women might have been involved.
Yeah, actually there was a couple of people there, and they went through this whole scenario, and you've got a job and you don't have a job, and you have an apartment and you don't have, how do you do it, how do you pay for it? It was overwhelming what these folks have to
Absolutely.
deal with when they get out of prison.
It really
Yeah.
is.
I mean, it's scary. No wonder they go back.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Right.
And
Because
if you can
it's-
find ways to intervene,
Right.
getting to your point, you know,
Yeah,
if you
it
can
was
find
very
ways.
enlightening because I'm thinking, oh, how hard is this? There's so many services. Well, there's not.
Well, I think it's also, we talk about trying to attract young people to our state, but making that jump from college to being a, young working adult can be a really difficult transition. If you're a college student and you're used to either living with your parents or your parents, or have an apartment that you're living in at school, or you're living in a dorm.
Exactly.
And then to make that transition to actually being, financially responsible
Right.
for paying bills and balancing a checkbook and all of this stuff.
Exactly. So how do we build financial literacy at the high school level and in the colleges?
Right.
And we're working on programs there. We have some recommendations to assist with that.
That's great.
We really, to me, that's our bread and butter, being able to create that financial independence where you're not putting everything on your credit card. You're not having to live at home because you can't afford to go out and rent or buy a house or get a car to be able to work. One of the things that we asked students once is just how many loans do you have? How much loan, volume do you have there? And most of them couldn't tell you how much they owe. And that's not a good thing.
After
Right.
college?
During college,
Yeah,
how much
'cause
how
they
much
have
do you
big
have for
bucks.
loans? And it's big bucks. And seeing if there's ways that we can help. One of the other ways we were able to help with that, I don't like debt, school debt or any kind of debt, but to the extent that you have debt, you'd rather be paying a lower rate than a higher rate. And so we teamed up with VSAC, and through our local investment program, we put $33 million of our dollars back into local investments. It's money we would have invested in longer term securities anyways, so let's do it locally. So we put $4 million into a VSAC bond deal to lower the cost of financing, and it was the lowest in the history of VSAC. So
Wow.
if we can lower the rate of debt for students, that's a start.
Yeah.
And also work with them in financial literacy about what does that debt mean? You have to pay that back. Have you thought the consequences through all the way as you're making
Right.
those financial
Well,
decisions?
because it's not just that. It's you probably have a car payment if you're trying to
Absolutely.
get to work in Vermont. If you work in Vermont, you basically have to have a car.
Yes.
And then you have rent, and you have cost of living and all of that other stuff. Buying a house in Vermont, especially if you're under 30, is really, really difficult to
And
do.
if God forbid you want to
Absolutely.
start a family,
Yeah.
or and have and
exactly.
how do you do that?
Yep.
Do you know what the average debt ratio is for kids who just graduated
I
college?
honestly
Whether
don't
it's
know.
60 or 100,000, something staggering
It's
like
staggering.
that.
I don't know what the
60?
number is, to
Yeah, I
be
don't- I'm
honest.
sorry.
But I certainly would take a
Whatever it
look
is.
at that. But from our end, the local investment program was to help with those things. We've done some energy efficiency projects, renewable energy projects. We invested $10 million with VITA, and they turned that
Nice.
into to assisting in lowering the cost of financing, and they've leveraged that into about $30 million worth of energy loans to corporations
VITA is
and
such a great
businesses.
program.
It's a great
Awesome.
program.
Yeah,
I
we
love
have
it.
to have them on because I don't think a lot of people know that VITA's out there,
Yeah.
and they do so much. The Vermont Economic Development
Authority.
Authority.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that, because I say VITA and then GASB, which is
Yeah,
Government
whatever that is.
Standards Boards. And
The
you live in your acronyms.
Yeah,
and,
yes,
and,
exactly.
and I forget that sometimes, so thank you for
so,
doing
well,
that.
I don't think people, what is VITA?
Yes.
So I wanted to talk a little bit. There's so much, you have done so much, Beth, I swear. All right, so the healthcare plan savings for retired teachers,
Yes.
and you have a proposal for retired teachers' healthcare plan,
Right.
which was a little bit of a topic this year, but were you involved in that
No,
discussion?
we're not involved in the active discussion. We're
Okay.
involved with retirees. So
Okay.
we went out to bid this past year and took a look at our health care, and we stayed with VHI, but we were able to lower the cost of premiums. In this day and age with health care going up, for the pre-Medicare population up to 64, we kept the rates at 0.
Whoa.
Rate increase.
Bless
And
you.
for the 65 and over, it was a minus 2%. So, where have you heard that before?
Really?
So we were pretty pleased with that. We've built in a lot of wellness programs. We've looked at ways that we can cut costs.
I'm only surprised because that is not a healthy, speaking personally, that is not a healthy group.
Well, we're really pleased with the results, and I think it speaks to some of the efforts we've made on reducing the liabilities. One of the programs we did, and this is going to we'll talk about acronyms, it's called Egg Whip. It sounds a little like your breakfast,
Right.
Whip up those eggs,
Yeah.
but it's actually employer group waiver plan. And we're providing the same cost, the same benefits for prescription drugs. But what we did is we did it through the Medicare program and then wrapped around it what we needed, that wasn't operated from that. And that's bringing in about $4 million this year of money from the federal government to us for the same benefit, same services we provide. So when you can provide the service and get a $4 million reduction in
who's
cost.
eligible for the Egg Whip?
Egg Whip is something that we do. It's part of our retired teacher program and the retired state program. They use it on the
Yours
state
perked
side
up.
to reduce the cost of premiums. So it really is about lowering the cost of the health care itself. So it's not an
Wow.
extra benefit.
Oh, I
Although there
see.
is something in there for folks that are low income for prescription benefits.
Yeah,
and we
because I
want
heard
people
you
to know
mention
about that.
prescription, because
Yeah.
every once in a while I get very surprised at the over-the-counter in my drugstore where
Yeah.
it's in the beginning of the year and I haven't met the deductible or
yes,
something.
yes.
It's a little staggering.
Oh yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know how people who don't have.
Exactly.
Honest to God, I light candles every day for the coverage I have from state government, because I don't know how people do it.
It is very difficult. I think those programs are essential, but doing them in a cost-effective manner.
Right.
So if you can do the same thing and pay $4 million less, that's
Sounds-
music to my
sounds
ears. I
good.
like the numbers,
Yes,
so do the
exactly.
taxpayers. Pensions is on the list of things that you and I talked about discussing,
Right.
and I recognize that they are very big liabilities. But what we've done since is change the way we finance some of those, and change the way, and employees are paying a little bit more. A teacher back in 2010 was paying 3.54% of salary for pensions. Now they're paying 6%. Employees, the state employees, same thing. They went up to 6.65 this past year. Which, if we had let the some legislation sunset, they would have been paying 4.85. That's a almost $8 million swing where employees stepped up to the plate. But we've also changed the way we're financing some of those. We were putting a lot of our health care in a credit card and saying we'll figure it out later,
Right.
and figuring out a way to change that.
What I do.
All in, all those that one healthcare change for teachers was about $480 million of reduced interest costs between 2014 and projected out to 2038 when we're going to be able to fully fund these. All in, the changes that we've made are saving the taxpayers $1.3 billion over a 25-year period. Though that's, that's smart financing. We can disagree on some of the other issues, and people will, and I recognize that there's a discourse around those. But if we can work together, and we've worked with Republican and Democratic governors to make these changes,
Right.
and when you can make those changes and save the taxpayer and provide a benefit, that's
great.
music to the ears of a treasurer,
Well,
believe
exactly.
me. So, hey,
And it should be to a governor, too.
A lot of
on
those,
that.
so talking about, the state pension fund, Vermont's somewhat unique, I think, in the fact that it runs both state employees pension fund as well as the teachers retirement pension fund. I don't think all states
some do, some
that.
don't. It's a mixed bag.
It's so it's interesting. I think the way we got there, there's a number of people out there that feel like we haven't fully funded some of those funds. And we kind of got there, at least in my understanding, through the recession. It wasn't fully funded for a couple of years there, and then you get behind, and then it's more difficult to catch back up.
Right.
So you're thinking, your office is predicting we'll catch back up by 2035?
2038.
2038
Yeah.
is the
That's
date.
the plan, and that's in statute. One of the things that you're right, there were two issues. One is when you don't put it, if you're, I'm going to use the analogy, if you're working to pay, save for your child's college education. If you start doing that when the child's a sophomore in high school, you're probably not going to make it. You've got to do that when they're in preschool or when they were born. You know what I mean? Start saving some money. So the state had a financing plan, and the actuaries would say you need X number of dollars. And for a very long period of time, particularly in the teachers system, we put in half, 1 year 38% of what the actuaries said we should put in. You don't catch up that way.
No.
States that did that, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, they're in serious trouble. We fixed that in 2007. We actually fixed it in 2005, working with then one of my favorite people who's retired, Jim Reardon, who's the Commissioner of
Yeah,
Finance.
we were just
back
talking
then,
about him before the show.
and Governor Douglas, and we fixed it back in 2007. And I want to say thank you to Governor Douglas, Governor Shumlin, and Governor Scott for fully funding the pension since then. Because if you do that, part of what we're doing, and when we're fully funding it, is paying down the mortgage, so to speak.
Right.
When you look at the big numbers, they can be pretty scary.
Right.
It's about $1.8 billion of pension unfunded liability. But part of what we're doing every year is paying down a portion of that. It's like your mortgage at home. You're not gonna, you look and you say, oh my word, I got a $300,000 mortgage. But you're not paying all that $300,000 in 1 year. You're paying that over time.
Is David Coates feeling a little better?
I think he likes the fact that we've saved some money. We do have some disagreements on different issues around it.
Because I've heard him,
Yep.
he's given a speech constantly up at the legislature, and he's been to different
He and
groups
I have
that I've
debated
heard.
this several times.
have you?
Yeah, at the legislature. There was a fire alarm pulled, or not pulled, there was a fire alarm during one of those. I'm not sure whether
really?
someone thought we
Somebody
were really
thought-
boring or whether it just happened.
Well, he
or
had
whatever,
that number
but,
up to 3.8 billion. That was his
it's
number.
Actually,
at one
that
point.
number was a year old, and that was healthcare and pensions.
Oh, I see.
And
So it's
and the
down
pensions
now.
actually went down about, the healthcare went down about $200 million last year.
So he should
about
be feeling a
3.6.
little better.
So I'd like to point that out to him.
Yeah,
I love David, and I'm just going to say this.
His heart's in the right place. He was.
Jed Spalding introduced us years ago, and it was on pensions. And he introduced us. He said, "You two will like each other. You're both geeks." And I looked at David. He looked at me, and we said, "Yeah, you're right."
Yeah. Do you know David?
I do, yes,
Yeah,
I do know
he's a
David.
great
And
guy.
we work very on the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee. We're on the VSAC board together, the bond bank, and he's just a great public
Well,
servant.
I think right or wrong, but he really helped keep this discussion going.
Absolutely, and the
So-
dialogue is important. Not everyone's going to agree on every issue, but I think we're making the right incremental steps. It's hard to argue with $1.3 billion.
Well, the
worth of
healthcare
savings.
piece is in some ways easier because you can change health plans in some ways. It's a lot. You can't really change pension plans. Those usually are pretty fixed, and
true.
you can't, and they're not as variable. Because even this year, changing the VHI plans for teachers' healthcare contracts, has a fairly dramatic effect on the overall liability of the state.
Yeah, I actually I'm not going to render opinion on the merits of that, the active teacher, that, they've got some work to do, and I'm pleased that the governor and the legislature and the NEA and the employee groups are all working together to try to find a solution. That's the real heart of Vermont.
Well, I think I was referring more to the VHI plans themselves changing and not, how we contract those.
Has the discussion of, I'm forgetting that, it's combined, it's defined benefits and defined contribution. Has that issue,
that
is
comes
that
up
still
every now and
around?
then. I would argue, I've actually, and we'll be happy to present it to the legislature. I've done the numbers, and if we were to switch to a defined contribution, it would actually cost us more.
Oh, really? I'm glad about that.
So, because when you're looking at the mortgage payment, and you look at how much is for the unfunded liability versus how much is for what's called normal costs, which means if I was hired today, and you calculate when my probability of retirement, and just for the record, it's a long time from now, couldn't resist. But and you calculate that normal cost is around, for the teachers, it's about 1.34% of payroll, and for the state employees, I don't remember the number. It's probably north of 3%, something in there. Defined contribution, you'd still have to pay the unfunded liability, and you'd be replacing that 1.33 and that 3% with 7%.
And you have no say about what the employee's doing with their money in or out. Just in case you're not sure, but the defined benefits means when you retire, you get a set amount every month
based on your average
income, and you set those rules up front. But the defined contribution is like you're playing the stock market.
Yeah, you put in a contribution, you put in a defined contribution. Right. But in this case, in our defined contribution system, the state system's 7%. So if you're going to put in 7% as an employer versus 1.33 or 3%, do the numbers. It's going to cost you more.
Right.
Plus, that liability will continue to grow because if you have less people in the plan, you have to be more conservative as you age it out.
Right.
So your return rate's going to go down. So you're going to still have a growing unfunded liability, and you're going to be paying more for the normal cost.
Right.
So from my end, finding a way to do cost-effective defined benefit plans is the answer. Now, they have to be cost-effective for the employee and the taxpayer. And that's what we're working to do, is find that balance.
And that's where that education comes in. I don't know, I bet 3/4 of the employees, and I'm in that group, wouldn't know how to do it right. And then who do you have to blame if you have no money when you retire? You just feel pretty bad.
Well, exactly. So I think that we can do retirement. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
I would agree with you that the lack of contributions, and one that I didn't follow up on, which was the Great Recession. I mean, we all took a hit in the Great Recession.
Right.
And by the way, if you had a 401k and you were going to retire in 2008, you were in serious trouble. Yeah, you were rethinking your retirement plans.
Yeah.
So I think that we're trying to find a balanced approach. Employees have worked with us in the municipal system. I think it's 4 out of the last 6 years we've raised the amount for the employee and the employer together and said it's a shared responsibility. And people have worked together. That's the great thing about Vermont. We haven't had lawsuits that say, well, you're infringing on my rights here. We're working together to find solutions. And employees see this as an investment in themselves, and that's a great way to do things.
So you came forward this past year with a proposal on how to fund the Lake Champlain cleanup effort.
Yep.
This is, if you look at it, you can almost look at this as another unfunded liability that the state is facing. If you look at the cleanup over the next 30 years and what it's going to cost, we've severely underfunded it and for the past decade, and even this year transferred some money that had been allocated for lake cleanup to affordable housing. We can all debate the merits of doing that. But you came forward with a plan on how to address this issue. Can you walk us through it a little bit?
Well, I think that's a very good point. That it's I treat this as an asset when you look at the state, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think that tourism is about $2.5 billion industry, and it depends very, very much on our lakes and our rivers and the quality of our water. Plus, a great number of us use surface water for drinking, and so it's important that we take care of this. And you don't let if you're a company, if you're a corporation, you or a small business, you don't let the assets deteriorate. You invest in them every year, and we have not invested the way we should. So we're playing a little catch-up. So I would say that you're right that it's a bigger bill because we didn't invest in the past. And I'd also point out that if we had invested properly on the pension side, if we in those years where we didn't put in the ARC, that ARC means annual actuarially required contribution, the amount that the actuary said that we did. If we had actually funded that correctly, we'd have money in excess of what you need now, and you would be able to fund the water cleanup with the difference.
Wow.
So smart financing, it compounds, and you got to do the right thing. So we were asked to take a look at that. The legislature had gone through several iterations of this, and looking at it from the revenue side on the legislators. What revenue sources do you need to fund the water?
Right.
So they asked the treasurer's office to do it. So folks kid that I was voluntold. I wasn't in the committee room, although I have figured out which senator recommended the treasurer's office to do this study.
Are they on a list?
We're going to have this conversation. Whoa, yep. But from our end, we were asked to take a look at it from the revenue side. I wanted to change that dynamic a little bit. We did look at it from the revenue side, and we had 23 stakeholder meetings. Again, it's collaboration in the state with over 1,000 stakeholders involved. Farmers, people that own businesses, ski resorts, you name it. We had everybody in to talk about, how do you address this and what revenue sources could you possibly look at and which ones are clearly, showstoppers for you. And there were a lot of showstoppers. This group, farmers didn't like these.
Right.
You take it over to the retail group, they don't like these. You take it over to the Chamber of Commerce, they don't like these. And when you put it all together, there were very few common denominators. One of them happened to be something we call, it's a bad choice of words, I think. It's called a parcel fee, but it's really a user fee.
Right.
And so it's not just a flat parcel fee, because I'm against flat parcel fees. Those are too much like a property tax. I want to see something that's tied to the usage, so
Right.
that folks that are polluting more pay more, and that property owners who are not polluting don't pay as much. So that's going to take some time.
I did think it was unfortunate that your proposal was presented, or the media portrayed it as a per parcel fee.
I would agree.
And that was the way that it was described.
Yeah.
A per parcel fee, one of the issues with it is that it's worse than a property tax because
Yes.
it's regressive.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think, a usage fee based on, on what the type of property, what it's being used for,
Exactly.
is much more appropriate.
Thank you.
And even the size of the property,
Right.
for example.
And we got some consensus around that.
Right.
No one wants to have a revenue source. Now, I took it a step further, though. The mandate was look at the revenue sources. And when we went to these stakeholder meetings, we had over 70 different revenues submitted to us for an idea. So this poor young man named Andrew Steino in the tax department had to model each one of those and work with us. And some of them were negative, it cost more to administer them than
Right.
so we took those off the list. Some of them clearly had some public policy issues, so we took those off the list. I'm not a big fan of certain types of taxes that I think are regressive, so we took those off the list. We talked to the stakeholders, and we ended up with this usage fee as a source. But I wanted to take this one step further, which is let's find ways that we can do it without raising taxes. Let's take a look at what's available there. And so when we started looking at our capital projects, and we have an amount each year we do in our through borrowings, through long-term debt.
Yeah.
And we took a look at that, and we saw that we hadn't used a lot of the money we had already borrowed. And what we saw was that there was a one-time opportunity that a couple of departments had been behind on some of the engineering work that they needed to do for capital projects.
So they had extra.
So we had some room. Even if they got up to speed on that engineering work, it would take a couple years before it was shovel ready. So in the first 2 years of the lake project, we saw that we had an opportunity to use some of our capital budget without raising taxes, submitted that to the governor, and he liked it,
Yeah.
and made a few changes to it. But what we ended up with was $48 million over the next 2 years, over and above what we're already doing for water
Right.
quality,
Excellent.
that we can put out there for resources. Towns like it because they don't have to add money.
Right.
This is money that they don't need to borrow, that we can get out there to towns and help them
And
with
this
this
is
project.
this is the plan that the legislature ended up passing, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's great.
What I like about that, approaching it that way, I think, is it makes it really clear you're basically in infrastructure bonding
Yes.
is very similar to what this is.
Absolutely.
And
you're investing in an asset
Right.
that produces.
A strong economic
Exactly.
driver. We can't
Exactly.
function without
makes
that.
very clear, I think, that we need to treat our water quality, our waterways, and our lakes and streams and rivers as infrastructure.
Absolutely.
You know, because I go back 100 years, and it was our infrastructure.
Absolutely.
You know, Vermont was Burlington was the 3rd largest freshwater port in the world.
Now that I didn't know.
Yeah, I
Thank
didn't
you.
either.
Yeah, and so it very was much part of our infrastructure, that those waterways, and we need to think about them that way.
I think that that's exactly what, you know, in our long-term plan, we're saying if you need to raise revenue, these would be the sources. But let's look first at what we can do before that.
Right.
And one of our long-term recommendations is to take a percentage of your capital expenditures and treat them as an investment in water infrastructure.
Right.
So you could write the report next time.
Well, whoever did that modeling for you deserves a gold star.
They did some really good work. You know, the report was due on January 15th, which happened to be a Sunday, and I had a reporter call me and said, when are you going to turn it in? I said, the 15th. And she wrote back and said, well, that's a Sunday. And we wrote back, we know. We finished it in time to get home to watch one of the playoff games.
Yeah,
Oh,
there you
perfect.
go.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Timing is
January
everything.
is a little...
Yeah, you know, we were trying to get it
Can I
done.
just ask you,
Sure.
on your concept of user fee, what would that impact the farmers? If they have land, how does that impact
Well, they
them?
would
I'm
be
just-
involved in it as well. We've got some work to do with the legislature. So the advantage of having a 2-year window with no taxes and no increases to do this and 48 million is it gives you time to plan and
And
what
see
that
where
would
you
look
are.
like. So they do have an advisory committee that they've put together to look at this. We asked not to be on the committee but to provide technical assistance because from my end I don't want to be advocating a position. I want to be able to work with the governor, work with the legislature to try to pull this together and work with the various groups. I think that's something that our office has been very adept at, is bringing different disparate groups together to find solutions.
That's great.
So we're looking, I want to do as much of this as possible without raising taxes by finding the resources within. Now the governor has expenditure authority, the legislature has some, I don't. So that, you know, but we're more than willing to work with all parties to try to do this in the most efficient way possible. But recognizing also that you have to invest in that asset because if you don't, the asset deteriorates and so does economic development of
Has-
the
It's
state.
almost
sorry.
worse in the case of the lake because not only does it deteriorate, it deteriorates exponentially.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
the further you let it go, the more phosphorus
got it.
load
Yeah, and
it
I'm wondering,
gets
is there
more
a
and more
point at
expensive.
which
Yeah, we're not there.
hard to come
Exactly,
back?
but
Well,
that's what happens in some
Debt is
pension
dead,
plans.
is
They,
it?
you know, when
Yeah.
you don't pay the annual actually required contribution, don't pay the ARC, they've reached a tipping point. We have not because we've added that discipline.
Good.
And again, I want to thank 3 governors in a row for paying that.
That's great.
But you know, and it's not just Lake Champlain. 94% of the state is under what's called a TMDL, which is
Right,
total
right.
maximum daily load.
Yep.
And essentially a phosphorus budget or a pollution budget with the federal government. So, and the one area that isn't covered under that is Bennington, and they have a little PFOA issue going on down in Bennington.
Oh, yeah, we've read about that.
So, you know, recognizing that investing in your natural resources, a particular state that does depend so much on tourism, and where a lot of folks, their drinking water again is from surface water.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to address these things.
Well, and we've got some beautiful waterways aside from Lake
yeah.
Champlain. You
Well,
know,
for
for
fishing, for
Magog.
all kinds of
absolutely.
boating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got so many of them.
Lake Magog is beautiful. You know,
It
I
is.
love it. You know, a few years back, I took my grandchildren to all the state parks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Great, what an
You've got some
adventure.
great
They enjoyed
state
it.
parks.
They enjoyed it.
Beth, is New York and Canada at the table with us a
They
little?
are,
Because they were years ago, they were very active.
They are. New York has its own TMDL, and they've offered to open it up and work with us. The difference is that if you look at the frontage there, a lot of the New
mostly
York
us.
side is more forest, and
Yeah.
on our side is more farming,
Yeah.
and so we actually have a bigger piece of the pollution
Right,
load
right.
by far.
I know when,
Yeah.
I remember I forget what job I had, but Canada was very concerned, seriously
Well, most of the
concerned.
pollution is on the northern end of the lake,
Right.
butting up against the Canadian
Right.
border.
Yeah.
So they've been very
Yeah,
interested.
they were
in coming
very
in.
vocal
Yeah.
there for a while, and
Absolutely.
I'm sure they're still doing that.
But if you look at the land use patterns, it's mostly our issues. We need to address them. We also need to make sure because, you know, farmers, now, number one, the Treasurer's Office is not going to determine the future of agriculture in this state. That's not our job. But to the extent that we're working with farmers, we've identified a few things in our report. working with the Vermont Agricultural Assistance Corporation, VAC, to do so that if you do good agricultural practices, we can lower the interest rate on your loan, for instance. Finding ways that we can incentivize and work with farmers, because frankly, farmers have, it's a tough business. The milk prices haven't been great for a few years, and we want to be able to support all of our economy and recognize that they are partners with us and work together.
Great. I think there is one other thing, you very bold is some of these things, about fossil fuel divestment.
Yes.
We were just talking about, I wanted to ask about that.
Okay.
Because we were just talking about divestment.
Sure. Well, a few years ago, I've been active on the environmental, social, and governance, ESG. So I'm going to do another acronym here, ESG.
That one I couldn't give the words
governance,
for.
and issues in this state. And I'm proud of this state. Back in 2004, I believe, then Treasurer Spalding put us down, asked us to be a founding member of a group called Investment Network for Climate Risk. So we work with other states, and there were 11 founding members, New York, California, Utah, or was it Utah or New Mexico? Maybe New Mexico, Maine, and we were all working together to try to pool our efforts to try to improve those issues. And we've done a lot of work since then. Vermont petitioned the SEC to get better disclosure laws on environmental issues. I'm a member of a group called the Carbon Asset Risk Project, where we've worked with companies and say, look, if you look at a future low carbon environment, how can you be investing so much research and development money into finding new resources when we should be lowering those? And have a dialogue with the companies. We've also had a dialogue with the managers. How do you work in, that's called the stranded asset thesis, that that you're going to have more research and development and resources that you can't use down the road, stranded asset. How do you bake that into your investment process, investment manager? How do you bake these into what do you see as the horizon for investments in these areas? So having those dialogues and working with folks is important to me. We call that constructive engagement or shareholder activism. We've been very activists on that and working on that. I differed with some folks on the issue of divestment, where instead of shareholder engagement, which what you're doing is saying, I'm taking my money out of these particular investments and walking away from the table. My concern with that was that two things. Number one, we saw that it would have harm to the pension funds. And for me, as a fiduciary, these are some taxpayer dollars and employee dollars. You put your money in when you were an active employee, and thank you for your service. And we have a responsibility to make the most in our investments to keep those funds. That's a fiduciary responsibility that I have to every single taxpayer and to every employee. Also, we saw that, so from a financial side, we saw that it would reduce our options for investments, which would reduce likely reduce our returns. And we had an outside vendor subsequently do a study that the environmental activists participated in and confirmed our position there. At the same time, we said we want to be involved in going, from my end, going to the table and being able to make change. Now, I'm going to give a tough example, ExxonMobil.
I was going to say, that's a good.
So back in 2015, I went to the ExxonMobil shareholder meeting, and I had a meeting. I went to the meeting. I met with Mr. Tillerson, and I told him that I thought his approach to renewables was inadequate. Actually, I said wholly inadequate. But from my end, we did not win that year. We had a shareholder resolution, and it got 9.5% of the vote, under 10%. And there were some folks who said, you're never going to succeed with this. So the next year, it wasn't quite the same proposal. It was a little different, but on environmental disclosure, we got 38%, I believe. This past year, we got 62%.
Wow.
So 62% of ExxonMobil's shareholders said, you need to do environmental disclosure, and you need to start factoring in how this factors into a low-carbon economy, and do those scenarios and bake that into your investment process and your management process.
I think it's interesting because everyone points to ExxonMobil as the big, carbon energy, behemoth in the U.S. But they've done a lot of investment over the last decade in renewable technology, as well as natural gas and other technologies that increase the efficiency of carbon-based fuels. And even Secretary Tillerson's now come out supporting
Carbon tax.
supporting a carbon tax, as well as supporting the Paris Climate Accords.
Yep.
And it's interesting to see that transition for a company
There is
that's
a transition.
as large.
Now, is it everything I want it to be? No. And, you know, and do I still take issue with some of ExxonMobil's strategies? Absolutely. And as a shareholder, interested in the future profitability of that company, as an investor,
Right.
for you and all the other members of the state and the teachers in the municipal retirement system, I'm going to continue to advocate. The other thing they did is 2 years ago, something called proxy access. Now, it sounds really technical, and it was. Took me a while to figure out exactly what we were doing with it. We passed a resolution on that, which allowed us to team up with New York and other states to recommend somebody for the board. Exxon, other companies saw the light, and this past year, the ExxonMobil put an environmental expert on their board of directors for the first time.
Well, I think they have to. They just for survival in the future.
Yeah.
I think they're figuring this out.
Yeah.
So am I
This is
a
where people are
fan of
going.
everything they're doing? Absolutely not. But do I think that we've made a difference by staying in the game and not divesting?
Right.
Absolutely.
That's
And it's
great.
not all black and white. You know, one of the companies that folks see, I see vans in this state, and they say, I won't say which company, and it'll say using SunPower products. And SunPower is a company that does solar,
Right,
and it's
right.
and the products. SunPower is 60% owned by Total SA, which is an oil company in France.
Yes.
Okay.
I love it.
So when you're talking a fossil-free mutual fund that has SunPower in it, it actually has 60% of the profits are going to an oil company.
Yeah.
That oil company also, when solar stocks were tanking back in 2012, gave them $1 billion of cheap financing because they're looking to diversify.
Right.
They've also looked at other products that I can't begin to understand the technology.
Yeah.
I'm not an engineer. And they're looking at diversification because they recognize that the future is changing.
Right.
And they want to be part of it. So companies can transform themselves, but we need to be part of that discussion.
Well, I think that's why Exxon is investing so heavily in renewable technology, because there is a finite amount of carbon fuel on the planet, and at some point they're going to run out, and you have to start thinking
Or
longer term.
even before that point, in terms of the environmental impacts, and I
Right.
do believe that they're real. That said, I'm not a big fan. As I said, I think that they can do more. But as an activist shareholder interested in the future investments because of the people that we represent, you and all those
Thank you for that.
all those 16, 17,000 retirees, I'm going to continue to do it that way because I don't believe that divestment's the right strategy, at least for our portfolio. I haven't analyzed every portfolio in the country. It differs a little between pensions and funds. For instance, if you're a nonprofit that you might have a certain mission, you may have differing views on this. But looking at our issues, it didn't work for us. What we did, though, was a collaborative approach. We brought in environmental experts, we brought in environmental activists and said, we're going to do a study, you're going to help shape the study, and we're going to have an independent group look at it, and we're all going to live with the results.
And you do have one option for people to buy into that is
Fossil
that is a
fuel
fossil
free
fuel.
mutual fund.
Right.
I don't think I could say that very quick. I can say that
I was
slowly.
I was
Fossil
struggling to
fuel-free mutual-
remember the name of it, but yes.
It's a little bit of a tongue twister,
Yeah.
but we do. And so if people choose to do that, they can with their own money in our deferred comp fund and our 403B,
Right,
which is a
yep, I
teacher's
remember that,
deferred comp,
right.
and then defined
So I
contributions.
hate to stop this discussion because I love the hedging the bet. I
Yes.
just got signaled that we're running out of time. Beth, we're so thrilled that you told you that
Thank you
hour
very
goes
much.
fast.
It does, and
this
thank you
was-
very much. It was very
was
insightful.
great.
Good questions. Thank
Oh,
you very
thank you.
much.
Well,
Well, thank you so much for
My
being
pleasure.
Yeah,
My
thank
pleasure.
you, Beth.
Thank
It
you.
was great.
Thank you very
I told
much.
you do great. Thank you all for listening in. I know you enjoyed this program. We'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.
Thank you.